to Connie Martinson Talks Books. We read many books about leaders, and we talk about what makes a good leader. But there's no such thing as a leader without a follower. And why do we follow some of the leaders we do? We read about cults, we read about Enron, we read about countries that have still loyal followers. Why? My guest today, Jean Lipman-Blumen, has written a magnificent book called The Allure of Toxic Leaders: Why We Follow Destructive Bosses and Corrupt Politicians and How We Can Survive Them. The book is published by Oxford Press. Welcome, Jean.
Thank you.
Nice to be here. Jean, let me tell our friends, too, that you are Thornton Bradshaw Chair, and would you fill in the rest?
Thornton Bradshaw Professor of Public Policy and Professor of Organizational Behavior at the Peter Drucker and Masatoshi Ito Graduate School of Business.
And co-founder of the Institute for Leadership at Claremont McKenna.
At Claremont Graduate University.
Thank you. So when we come to this book, it is with a great deal of experience and observation. We also should say you were in the Carter White House.
That's right.
Not to imply that he was a toxic leader, but you do talk in the book about people who are in White Houses per se, or in the coterie of leaders. They are the followers. The fear of being an outsider, of losing your inner position.
That seems to be a very frightening thing to people. It's like being thrown out of the Garden of Eden. And you mentioned the White House. I remember during my White House years, on Monday morning, most of Monday mornings were spent talking about who was in and who was out, who had lost ground over the weekend. And this was a matter of some concern to people, and I didn't understand it then in any real sense. I observed it, but I didn't understand it until I began to think about why people are so dependent on leaders and why they want to be so close in to where the leader is.
In the book, you talk in terms of looking for the parent figure in the authority figure. You come in and it is as if this king, this prime minister, this boss is the father or mother you never had.
Well, parents and other caretakers leave a very deep imprint. They have very deep footsteps, if you will. And we, despite the fact that as children we want to grow up and be on our own and be independent, when we grow up, we miss that. And so anybody who comes along and offers to do the things that our parents promised to do, which were to keep us safe, to love us, to put us in a position of being among the chosen, being important, these are things that we resonate to.
Yeah.
It's like hearing familiar music.
Yeah.
And beginning to dance all over again.
And also, one of the reasons we follow toxic leaders, they offer us a vision or an illusion of security and of, I guess, pushing back the tide of death.
Absolutely. And you said two very important things. You mentioned illusions and you mentioned the fear of death. Leaders, and particularly toxic leaders, are focused on giving people illusions, creating illusions that they can protect you from death. And that's really part of the human condition. We're all going to die, but if we thought about it all the time, we'd be immobilized. And one of the things that toxic leaders do all the time is create avenues and illusions to those avenues by which we can achieve immortality. We can transcend death. We can do something incredible.
I suppose this is why a star like Elvis Presley had an entourage who were always there saying, "Oh, you're wonderful." But in that entourage, as in any Enron or the companies you mention here, it made you feel part of the community, part of the family. You were on the inside.
Oh, I think that's very important to people, to feel that they are at the center of action, because that gives meaning to our lives. And in a sense, one of the very important things that leaders do is help us deal with the inevitable heartbreaks of life by giving those events meaning.
Yeah.
And being in that close in to a leader makes us feel safe, makes us feel we have meaning in our lives.
And the toxic leader will make that follower at times feel special and then fear you're out. It's a social death.
And for many people, social death is worse than physical death, because we know in quite vivid detail what happens in social death. With physical death, we can give ourselves all kinds of fantasies, pleasant fantasies, that there are virgins waiting for us in paradise.
Yeah.
But we know that when social death occurs, when we're isolated, when we're exiled, exile is the worst punishment that a community can give to an individual short of physical death.
Yeah. Within a work situation, there are many stories here about whistleblowers and people who were trying to change their middle management boss. And in some cases, they were ostracized because everybody else had to worry about that weekly paycheck.
And they're also afraid of reprisals. They're afraid that even though they know the whistleblower is speaking truth to power, and the whistleblower is articulating feelings and understandings that they themselves have, they don't want to be the ones to get the repercussions. And oftentimes, leaders will punish not simply the whistleblower, but everybody. All the prisoners pay the price when one prisoner misbehaves.
Yeah. What's the problem, though, with somebody who's sort of semi-toxic? I mean, there are people you talk about, such as Winston Churchill, who was, I suppose, a toxic leader in his early days, but crises made him a far better prime minister.
Well, context can change things dramatically, and certainly a crisis is a situation that has immense and very different kinds of impacts on leaders. Sometimes it unseats a good leader who simply doesn't have whatever it takes to rise to the next level to deal with the crisis. Sometimes it can give a leader who's meandering and floundering a sense of direction.
Yeah.
And sometimes the context reveals the leader to him or herself. And so the leader understands things about him or herself that the leader never understood before and can act on that new wisdom.
You say bad is stronger than good. How does that affect the follower?
Well, there's a lot of research that suggests that we remember bad things more than we remember good things that have happened to us. And people, certainly followers, understand bad and they cling to it as well. It's harder to get rid of, and many times people enter over and over again relationships with toxic leaders in an effort to get it right this time, because it was bad, and they don't think they're going to repeat the bad. They think they're going to overcome it. But sometimes they do. But when they don't, then they slip even farther behind and become, I think, even more intimidated by a toxic leader. They feel, I just can't do it.
Yeah. So let's talk, how do you choose a non-toxic leader? What are the qualities you look for?
I think you look for leaders who are devoted not to themselves and their own well-being and their power and their celebrity, but leaders who are focused on the good of the group. What is it that the group or the community needs? People who do not put money first, who do not put fame and their own celebrity first, who leaders who have integrity.
Well, that's all fine in politics. What about within the business community?
I think it's even more important there, absolutely more important, because your reputation is all you really have in business. That is the bottom line. People come back to you for your service or your product if they believe that you're honest, if they believe that you have integrity, if they believe if you believe that the business leader has your best interests at heart, not his or her own.
And you do say, though, that some of these CEOs you mentioned were also doing community service. They were on boards of museums and...
Oh, absolutely. And after all, we're looking at human beings. We're not trying to, at least I'm not trying to lay out a model of sainthood for leaders. If we're looking for saints, we're not going to find them in the business world. We're not going to find them in politics. We won't find them in education and religion. We simply won't find them in our everyday life.
Well, you even said about Mother Teresa accepting money from something that wasn't exactly...
From Charles Keating.
Yeah.
And then writing to Judge Ito, who was the presiding judge, to say, I don't really know what he did, but he's such a good man, you know, he contributes to charity. And so I think it's hard to know why she did that or, you know, what motivated her. But I think we're not looking for, it would be unrealistic to think that we're going to find people who, as leaders, are saint-like. Yeah. And when we do that, then we're looking for the impossible.
As I read the book and I realized that CEOs do fill their board of directors with people who are going to support them. Then when the media comes in and you read a Wall Street Journal or Forbes or Fortune, much of that information has been fed to the writer by that company's public relations director.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a dance that goes on between the CEO or the CEO's representatives and the media, because they both need each other. The media person needs access to the company and to the CEO in order to get a story, and the CEO or the company rep wants access to the media to put their best image out there. So they need each other, and it's very hard for particularly for the media, I think, not to be seduced.
Yeah, because they're taken on press junkets, they're given gifts, and in many ways the media has been controlled by a multinational that has similar interests.
That is all true, but I think even more important than that is the fact that as a media representative, as an interviewer, as a reporter, you need access. And if you write a story that's negative, I assure you, that closes the door.
Absolutely.
And if you write a good story, you get the door is immediately open. Yeah. I can't remember if it's in the book, but I think it is. The story of a young reporter many years ago during the Kennedy administration. He was 27 years old. He was working for the Washington Post, and he was asked to write an article about the new president, which he did. And it was a very positive article, and it was done with integrity. He wrote what he really believed. Well, can you imagine that the next day he got a call from Robert Kennedy saying the president read your article and really liked your article very much. He'd like to get to know you better. Are you busy for Thanksgiving? Because we would love to have you come to Florida with just family.
Yeah.
You understand, just family. And 20 years later, this young man, no longer so young, was looking back on that and feeling a little bit had by the Kennedys, realizing that, but still nostalgic about the day that he played touch football with the whole Kennedy clan.
That really, not that one says the Kennedys were toxic, but that is the allure of leadership. You do say there are three kinds of followers, and one is the benign follower.
I call that the benign. Well, there are really two kinds of benign followers. One kind is the kind who is, and we all share this to some degree, who are looking for reassurance that the leader can keep us safe, that we will not die, that by associating with that leader, that we will somehow be remembered forever, even if we die in the physical sense.
And that we're bigger than life.
Very definitely, that we transcend life. And the second kind of benign follower is somebody who is what I call type P. That was type A, people who deal with their existential anxiety through the leader. Type P is people who are pragmatic. They have their kids' dental bills to pay. They have a mortgage to pay. It's very pragmatic. They need to stay in the good graces.
One of the people who I guess is anonymous here is somebody who is 66, has worked for a firm for 10 or 15 years, knows that the boss or the leader is a toxic leader. But he says, I need the health care. My wife has diabetes. I'll just close my eyes to what's going on.
And that happens a lot. It depends what is going on.
Yeah.
Is it behavior that makes you uncomfortable, that makes you that undermines you, that intimidates you? Is it behavior in which the leader spills his or her anger all over you, or is it? And that can be very damaging in and of itself, and you have to weigh that in your own mind. But there's also behavior that's toxic, that crosses over the line of criminality and legality. And then I think you can't, for any reason, stick with that kind of a
because whistleblowers, as you point out in the book, nobody thanks them.
Absolutely not.
From the janitor at Watergate to the woman who blew the whistle on Enron.
And their own families don't thank them.
Or the man who discovered that the O-rings weren't working.
Roger Beausoleil.
Yeah.
On the Challengers. And that's a very interesting example, because he tried to tell them that they shouldn't fly because of the O-rings, and they would not listen. And so he tried to blow the whistle, and when he was called before the Congressional Investigating Committee, he made it very clear. He has become a pariah, an outcast in his own profession. He was an engineer, and a very capable one. And he can't earn a living as an engineer anymore. He is a consultant on organizational ethics now.
You write on opportunities to exercise leadership. As a toxic leader, particularly as they slip deeper into paranoia and toxicity, frequently devote the lion's share of their energies to controlling their followers, despite the evidence that followers often control themselves. Very interesting area here.
Well, I think that this is a complicated situation, actually, and I think that followers do, to a much greater degree than we will own up to, control ourselves. We
Yeah.
give ourselves all kinds of rationalizations that later harden into what I call control myths, so that we control our behavior. We're very obedient. We keep our heads down. We do what we're told to do. We don't blow the whistle.
But there was a group that didn't use the word team. They called themselves the lunch group, who
Right.
decided, wait a minute, enough is enough.
But you see, they had to use that subterfuge of calling themselves the lunch group when they began to work together to correct things, and either to reform the leader or, if need be, to overthrow the leader. But they knew that if they did it out in the open, that they would be in trouble. So they just said, oh, we're simply going to lunch. They didn't call meetings, they just went to lunch.
And then there is opportunities to learn how to resist and organize resistance. This is like being in the underground.
Well, it is. It is in many respects. And I think that people have to think about what are the strategies that we can use in order both to protect ourselves, to protect other people, to protect the organization, and to call a halt to toxic behavior. Because I think we do have to set limits on negative, dysfunctional behavior in and out of organizations.
Even when the toxic leader owns the store?
Yes, even then. It's harder then. I thought you were going to say even when the toxic leader is a genius, because oftentimes
Yeah.
people will endure the toxicity of a leader because they think that leader is a genius. This is oftentimes true in high-tech firms where that person